Buddy Michael Cohen here with you. The New York Jets head coach and general manager search now takes another turn. Could we be getting closer to possibly having some answers? Let's talk about it right after this. Let's talk about it right here on Sports Talk Nation. So, folks, as we move along here in this Jets head coaching search, which has been vast and wide, the Jets have covered all kinds of ground, even to the point of hitting ludicrous levels, as we are all sitting there waiting for them to make some kind of decision on their head coach and general manager. I don't shame the Jets for this because they have cast a wide net. They have looked as far and wide as they possibly could. But at the same time, when you have 5 general manager interviews in one day, and then when your head coaching search includes the likes of Mike Locksley of Maryland, you're getting to the point where you're kind of stretching yourself a little bit too thin. Obviously, the focus now needs to come down to really focus on the key names that have been bandied about, that have been talked about, and that's really where the Jets' focus should be. Maybe it is. Maybe they're looking at a lot of these guys as assistants or asking questions about other candidates. That being said, a couple of dominoes have been starting to fall here in this search process. One, obviously, Mike Vrabel going to the New England Patriots. Really no surprise. The last time I was on here with you on YouTube, we talked about how while he was the leading candidate for the Jets, and you had to be encouraged by what we heard earlier, right before the Jets' last game of the regular season, that it was a good interview between the two. There was always the chance that the Raiders or Patriots would swoop in, and of course the Patriots did. Gerard Mayo, as soon as we knew he was fired, you knew exactly what was going to happen, folks. Don't deny it. You knew it was coming, that Mike Vrabel, any minute, any day, any time, was going to get named the Patriots head coach, and he was. Exactly 1 week from the day Gerard Mayo was fired, Mike Vrabel named the head coach of the New England Patriots. No surprise. I mean, the guy was, with the exception of his first few years in the league with the Pittsburgh Steelers, was basically a lifelong Patriot, won 3 Super Bowls there. It made perfect sense for him to be the head coach of that football team. So the Jets have moved on, obviously, and continue to, as I said, cast this wide net to try to find this next head coach and obviously the GM pairing. And another domino also fell on Sunday when we found out that Rex Ryan is out of the running. According to Connor Hughes, this was on social media, that Rex Ryan will not be returning as head coach of the Jets, and I think that's a good thing. Okay, let's be honest. I think it's time to move on. Rex had his time here a long time ago. It was fun at the start, not so fun at the end. It's time to move on and find fresh blood. So a lot of the focus is now turned towards Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator of the Detroit Lions, and Brian Flores, who is the defensive coordinator of the Minnesota Vikings. And there is also the idea of package deals, potentially with Brian Flores being packaged with Ryan Grigson, who is the vice president of football ops with the Minnesota Vikings, and yes, the former Indianapolis Colts general manager. And this has caused a lot of fans to get really upset. I certainly understand why, because what's ironic about Flores, where people said that he rubbed a lot of people the wrong way down in Miami, and that he did not have a perfect tenure or relationship with a lot of players or people, in the football side of things in Miami. A lot of people feel the same way about Grigson down in his time in Indianapolis. And yes, he is the guy that drafted Andrew Luck. Andrew Luck was a generational talent. He was going to get drafted number 1 by the Colts, regardless of who was making that call. That was true. But yes, he also found a couple of good pieces like T.Y. Hilton and Kobe Fleener, a couple of good pieces that are part of those teams in the Colts in the early 2010s. That being said, you take a look at a lot of his drafts after that for the Indianapolis, they weren't that great. There was the whole controversy over Trent Richardson that kind of blew up in the Colts' face at that time when he was the GM. And the biggest thing that a lot of people take away, and especially if you look at these message boards and you listen to Colt fans, you ask friends who are Colts fans, they felt that he failed in developing an offensive line to protect Andrew Luck that eventually led to Luck retiring before the age of 30. Grigson had a lot of issues with developing a lot of relationships at his time in Indianapolis. There was as it's mentioned here in an article in ESPN There was a disconnect between Grigson and Chuck Pagano, with the relationship so strange that they barely talked during the 2015 season. In addition, several current and former players said it felt like Grigson had no desire to develop a relationship with them. And multiple sources said they perceived arrogance rubbed many inside the organization the wrong way. Now, keep in mind, in the years since his firing in Indianapolis, he has tried to rebrand himself and redevelop himself as a front office person. Spent time with the Cleveland Browns as a senior personal executive, spent time in Seattle as a senior football consultant, now, of course, with the Vikings as a senior vice president of player personnel. And the sense from a lot of things I have read is that there's a sense that this is a guy who could go back into the general manager's chair and has learned from his past mistakes. We shall see. That's to be determined, of course. And then you have the Flores situation. Now, Brian Flores, despite the fact that he did have 2 of his 3 years with a winning record, he did not make the playoffs in either one of those years. There was always the perception that he, too, rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, had a bad relationship with Tua Tagovailoa. But not only that, but you have the podcast that was put out by Ryan Fitzpatrick about a month ago, in which he describes why he feels Brian Flores is having a hard time, or has had a hard time, getting another opportunity to be a head coach. And he spoke about relationships. He spoke about how people may not come out and vouch for him necessarily.
I think he burned a lot of bridges there. I think he alienated himself from the entire staff. Instead of what you were just talking about, having the humility to ask questions, to collaborate.
Now, those are some pretty tough indictments that he gave Fitzpatrick of Flores. Not only did he have those issues, the issues that he had with his football team, but also the issues that he had with the owner down there, and of course that also led to the eventual lawsuit against the NFL, against the Dolphins, the Giants, the Broncos, over discrimination in their hiring practices, a lawsuit that, as far as I can tell, is still ongoing or still out there. So he has had his issues, but again, he has also, Flores, tried to rebuild his image, and has done so the last couple of years, working with Pittsburgh, working with the Minnesota Vikings, now as the defensive coordinator for the last couple of seasons now in Minnesota. And, of course, the Vikings defense has been very, very good under him. And there are people in Minnesota who feel that he, too, is deserving of an opportunity. And there are a lot of players even down there who have enjoyed working with him and for him down there in Minnesota. So it remains to be seen how this thing is going to play out. But I will say this. I do have concerns. I do have concerns because this is a Jet franchise that has been steeped in poor leadership, steeped in inconsistency. They've had a lack of accountability up and down the organization. And when I hear about candidates who have had issues in the past with other teams, and you keep hearing those issues get brought up, like, as I mentioned, Ryan Fitzpatrick bring up the stuff with Flores, or all of a sudden all stuff coming up with Grigson, it makes you pause and saying, is this the right move for the Jets at this point in time? Should the Jets be the guinea pig to find out whether Brian Flores and Ryan Grigson have indeed changed, as they say they have, or as many of a number of people who have defended them come out and said? Is that true? Do we really want the Jets to be the guinea pig to find out whether that's true or not? Now, it remains to be seen whether they end up being hired. We still got a long way to go. The Jets, as far as I know, have not spoken to Brian Flores, but they have spoken to Grigson, and there is perception, of course, this all starting from a rumor from Rich Cimini on Twitter, who said that he saw Ryan Grigson and Flores as a combo the Jets like, thinking that someone like Aaron Glenn would be highly coveted by the Saints instead, and that Grigson would be at the top of their list. So that's why this has been a discussion point. That the beat writers, feeling around their sources, feel that this could be a possibility, that this tandem of Flores and Grigson could be coming to New York. So we'll have to wait and see. So again, we're in that wait-and-see period right now. We'll see if that comes to play. But if it does, I would be worried just based on their histories. Do the Jets really want this to happen again? And the Jets, been down this road before with former Miami Dolphin head coaches. Adam Gase comes to mind. And this kind of feels like the Gase thing all over again, where you bring in a coach, and you bring, or in this case, a coach and an executive who've had kind of a checkered history, and you're betting that perhaps it'll be different this time around. And I'll say this: while I am concerned about the idea of having those two together here with the Jets, I reserve the right to be wrong. I reserve the right for both Brian Flores and Ryan Grigson to prove me and any other skeptic wrong. Anybody else who's, going out there and saying, don't hire this guy, don't hire that. You have the right to be wrong. We all have the right to be wrong. If these two guys end up coming to the Jets and they end up succeeding and getting this team to the postseason and getting this team to have a postseason run, even over a couple of years, then we have a right to come back here and say, you know what? All those concerns we had about these two guys when they took the job, we were wrong. And that's why, for me, when I also take a look at the other candidates out there, someone like an Aaron Glenn stands out to me as the favorite. And there are, again, look at these different reports and rumors. Aaron Glenn potentially the favorite for the head coaching job with the Jets. Some say he's the favorite head coaching job with the Saints. Maybe it's both. Maybe they'll both end up having to basically have a stare down for Aaron Glenn. Aaron Glenn, the defensive coordinator for the Detroit Lions, has done a wonderful job in Detroit. His game plan against the Vikings and against Sam Darnold last week in the final game of the regular season was incredible. Cover zero, I haven't seen cover zero that good in a long time. It was almost like that kind of performance. With the play calling and the game plan that he put into that, reminded me of some of the things that we've seen, like someone like a Bill Belichick do in his heyday, even when he was with the Giants. Think of the Super Bowl that he had against the Bills many, many years ago, where that game plan was just incredible. That was the kind of work that he put in to that Detroit Lions defense for that game. And really all season, considering that Detroit's been battered with injuries. No Aiden Hutchinson, and Aaron Glenn has been able to get that group playing at a high level. And you listen to some of the things that Aaron Glenn talks about, and accountability, and holding guys responsible for their job. It's hard not to get excited about what you hear from him speaking. And it's hard to get excited from the results we have seen in Detroit. Now, he is, to me, the top candidate in my mind. Of course, that's a little bit of a bias. He's a former Jet. He played on the team for 8 years in the mid to late 90s, early 2000s, obviously. Now, he could be a package deal, too. Some people think that Chris Spielman, who is the CEO for the Detroit Lions, could be coming here potentially as the part of that package deal. He would be potentially the general manager. Now, he's a special assistant to the owner and CEO. That doesn't necessarily mean that he is the general manager, but he has been part of the turnaround in a lot of people's eyes of that franchise, and partly responsible for helping pick someone like a Dan Campbell to be their head coach. Whether that turns out to make him a very good general manager or not remains to be seen. And if you compare resumes, Grigson and Spielman, obviously Grigson stands out because he has had more experience and has been in front office a little bit longer than Chris Spielman. But again, I don't want to discount the idea that Chris Spielman may be a good general manager. He may be good, he may be bad. I'm not sure. It's a situation where we have, basically this is it. You have two guys in Grigson and Flores who have a resume. We know what we've seen from them in the past. And we have Glenn and Spielman who we don't know what they can be. And you're kind of hoping that they'll be great. So it's kind of a shot into the wind with those two guys. You can get the pairing that has experience or the pairing that necessarily doesn't have the experience in those roles. But, man, the hope is that they could be really, really good. And certainly their ceiling is very, very high. Now, of course, things could change. There could be other names again to the list. Obviously, Arthur Smith is going to be available. Hey, there's that guy. Of course, with the Steelers getting knocked out of the playoffs, Matt Nagy could be a part of this. Now, would Matt Nagy be a package deal with a Mike Borgonzi of the Kansas City Chiefs? Maybe. We'll see. Haven't heard too much rumors with Borgonzi and the Jets since they interviewed him a little over a week ago. And haven't heard too much with Dimitroff either. If you ask me personally, what I would do, I would probably pair Aaron Glenn with either a Borgonzi or a Thomas Dimitroff, two GM, one who has been a GM and very successful in Dimitroff with Atlanta, another guy who's been in the Kansas City front office in Borgonzi for a very long time, more than 16 years, and I would pair one of those guys with an Aaron Glenn. That to me would be more of where I would go, the experienced GM and the younger head coach, rather than just putting together Spielman and Glenn and just hoping for the best. Although it could be very good, it could be a mess one way or the other. We don't know, to be fair. So we'll see how this thing plays out, folks. But that's really all the rumblings of where this thing is going. What do you think? Who do you prefer to be the head coach of this football team, and who do you think they should hire as GM? Again, if it were me, I would have had the GM picked out a couple weeks ago. I would have had the GM picked out a couple weeks ago. You have the GM in place to evaluate the team, evaluate the roster, and pick the head coach that he feels fit to run this team. Feels like it's going to be a pairing. We'll see how that comes together the next couple of weeks. Folks, leave your thoughts below. We'll talk to you next time.